Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. It's been a while now since Molecule Man has been released, and despite the fact of whether you've unlocked him or not, you should be familiar with what his leadership is, or at the very least know about it. It's one of the most unique leaderships in the entire game, and probably has the most text associated with a leadership ability as well. But like many other mechanics and descriptions in the game, it's not really clear what the skill actually does. I've seen that many people are confused by this, so I decided to test it pretty thoroughly, and it's one of the reasons why this video kind of took longer to make, and there was kind of a bigger gap between the videos that I made this week. So sorry about that, but hopefully you'll find the video interesting and useful. I know I definitely did. Also stick around to the end of the video where you can see kind of a hidden ability that Molecule Man has that not many people know about. So without further ado, let's jump into the explanations and the testing. So if you look at the character usage tips that Netmarble provides, you'll see that they've said using Molecule Man as a leader will grant ignore damage increase-decrease between self and opponent's effect, increases damage dealt or decreases damage received between heroes, villains, and neutral characters don't apply to characters with this effect and their enemies. Looking at the actual leadership text, it says pretty much the same thing, saying that it ignores damage increase and decrease between self and opposing faction, and it also decreases chain hit and cleanses, or removes debuffs. Now there's nothing really confusing about the chain hit damage reduction or the debuff effect. What people are finding confusing or don't really find that clear is what does it mean to ignore damage increase and decrease effects, and specifically between self and opposing faction. The comments that I've frequently seen want to know basically what skills does Molecule Man counter, but besides this, does he counter those skills only on the enemy team, or does it also cancel them on his team? So if he was to use support, like for example Colossus, would it work for his team or would it not work at all? So I did a bunch of timeline tests and Shadowland tests using different team combinations and different skills that he could potentially counter, and basically pieced together what this leadership actually does. I'm going to be jumping into a bunch of different clips here, and as they play I'll be explaining what the purpose of the test is and what it reveals about the leadership for Molecule Man. So the timeline test is basically to see how much damage Blue Dragon takes from Wasp's 4th skill, I believe, and it's from the last hit of the 4th skill. The test will basically be how that damage changes when I use different combinations of supports and Molecule Man in the lead spot and not the lead spot. I did many of these tests and I left them running for a pretty long time, so I'm not going to show the entire clip, but I'll freeze frame some of the hits so you can see the damage that was done. Now keep in mind that skills have a range of damage that they can do. But for this base test, Blue Dragon took about anywhere from 8,000 to 11,000 damage. In the second clip that I'm going to show, I'm going to be using the same team, except I'm going to swap out one of the characters for Colossus. As you can see here, Colossus provides that amazing passive buff that gives me 50% damage reduction from superhero and supervillain factions. In this clip, I'm fighting the exact same player, but this time I'm using Colossus as my support. A few of you may have noticed that Wasp has buffs active. In all the tests I did, that buff came on immediately as soon as it was finished. She would just activate that skill and get those buffs again, so that was a non-factor. Besides that, this team also has insight on it, so you'll see kind of that green buff activate every so often. I took that into account when I was looking at the highs and lows of the damage numbers. So just a little heads up, or spoiler alert I guess. After I finished my tests, I found out that leaderships that provide a damage buff to all allies have no effect or interaction with Molecule Man's leadership. So Wasp's leadership, for example, that has a damage increase to all allies as well as some other buffs, has no effect to the results of this test. If you've kept track of the damage numbers so far on this test, you'll see that Colossus's passive is working and I'm taking less damage than I did in the previous clip. So here I'm taking anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 damage, whereas in the last one I was taking anywhere from 8,000 to 11,000. Now that I have my two damage number ranges, without Colossus support and with Colossus support, I can see that if I put Molecule Man in the leadership position, I can either take less damage because Colossus's support is working, or I can take more damage because the Colossus passive is nullified. Keep in mind that if the Colossus passive does work, and the leadership is active as well, then I should be taking even less damage because Molecule Man has chain hit damage reduction too. So in this clip I'm obviously using Molecule Man lead, and then I swapped into Blue Dragon right away. By the way, I'm running around a lot because Wasp was stuck in a weird rotation, so I was just trying to force her to use her 4th skill more often. If you've kept track of the damage numbers so far, you'll have seen that Molecule Man's lead does indeed cancel Colossus's passive, even on your own team. So with the Colossus passive, I was taking between 4,000 and 6,000 damage on the high end, and with the leadership and the Colossus passive, I'm taking between 6,000 and 8,000 on the high end. So what's happening here with the damage numbers is that the Colossus passive is being negated, but I'm also taking a bit less damage because of Molecule Man's damage reduction to chain hit. So to summarize, the leadership basically cancels buffs either to damage or damage taken relating to factions. So this would be heroes, villains, and neutral, which is basically every character in the game. And it applies for both sides or both teams. So essentially, I think it's the first skill in the game that has a similar effect to one side of the team and the other. So some of the examples of the buffs that are nullified by this leadership are Nick Fury's leadership, which you just saw there, increases damage to hero allies, as well as his passive buff, which also applies to all heroes and increases damage versus supervillains. Another one is Dormammu's leadership, which is sort of like the opposite of Nick Fury's, and it provides a damage increase versus superheroes for villain allies. So basically, if you see any leadership skill that says it applies to heroes or villains, then it is nullified. But besides skills like this, you might also be surprised to learn that it also applies to effects like that of CTPs. So since the Insight CTP provides a damage increase to both hero and villain factions, then it is also nullified or negated. You may have noticed that the effect says it applies to all allies, so it shouldn't be negated, but as long as there's that other part that mentions specific factions, then it does get countered. Now there's plenty of skills in the game that provide a damage increase or decrease, but aren't related to factions. Or at the very least, they don't use the word factions in their description. So you can see one example of that is Mr. Fantastic's leadership, which provides a damage increase, but specifically for Fantastic Four allies. Yet another example of this is Shadow Shell's passive. She provides not only 50% increase to defenses, but also 25% less damage taken. However, this effect only applies to Warrior of the Sky allies. So in order to figure out whether these effects that apply to specific groups function the same as factions, I decided to do a similar timeline test that I did with Colossus, but with Shadow Shell. If you remember from the first test, the damage that I was taking without any kind of support or leadership was between 11,000 and 8,000. So since I'm using Shadow Shell in this clip, I should be taking less damage than the initial test, similar to when I tested with Colossus. Because I'm dodging a lot of the hits here, I'm going to be speeding up these clips so you can see the damage numbers a bit faster. Judging by the damage from the first two hits, you can see that Shadow Shell's passive is working normally and I'm taking less damage overall. In this test, I'm taking about 5,000 damage on the low end and about 7,000 on the high end. Here, I'm using Molecule Man in the leadership position and then swapping to Blue Dragon right away. So if Molecule Man does indeed cancel Shadow Shell's effect, then I should be seeing higher damage numbers in this one than the previous test. If he doesn't cancel the passive, then I should be seeing actually lower damage numbers than the previous test, because again of that chain hit damage reduction. But besides that, you also have to keep in mind that the Insight buff is also being nullified in some of these hits. Looking at the hits so far, you can see that the Shadow Shell passive effect for damage reduction and increased defense is actually working normally, and it isn't being nullified by Molecule Man's lead like Colossus's passive was. The damage numbers in this test range anywhere from 4,000-ish on the low end to about 5,000 on the high end, which is lower than the 6,000 or 7,000 damage from the previous test. This means that Molecule Man's leadership doesn't have any impact on specific groups of characters. So by groups, in this case, I mean specific associations, so things like the Fantastic Four, Symbiotes, and Warriors of the Sky, for example. All of those don't fall under the classification of factions, heroes, villains, or neutral and work perfectly fine. But the testing doesn't stop there, because there's also buffs that apply to specific types of characters. In Marvel Future Fight, those types are Combat, Speed, Blast, and Universal. Looking at Ebony Maw's uniform effect, you'll see that he provides 25% damage increase to universals and a 25% damage decrease from universals. It's a little bit tougher to determine whether these effects are negated by Molecule Man's lead, because I can't use the same base that I did from the timeline tests. Besides that, it's kind of hard to find a team with a universal on it that has specific attacks where I can see the last hits or specific hits and the damage that they do. In order to test this, I'm basically going to be taking Molecule Man into Shadowland and testing with his leadership and then with and without Ebony Maw's passive effect. Based on how much of the enemy's health bar I can get through, I can determine if the effect is working or if it's nullified. To be as consistent as possible, in this clip I'm going to be using Molecule Man's 4th ability only and seeing how much time remains and the health of the two characters when I finish. To keep the video from getting too long, I'm going to be turning the popcorn machine on here to speed things up. As you'll see in this base test, I defeat the two characters with about 4 to 3 seconds left on the timer. Before I test Ebony Maw, I wanted to test with Mystique passive to verify if my results from before were actually correct. If you're not familiar with Mystique's passive effect, it provides a 45% damage increase versus hero factions, as well as a 40% damage increase versus villain factions. Since the two characters I'm fighting here are both heroes, then the 45% is the value that matters. Because we established before that the passive gets negated, then my time shouldn't change from the previous test. So a little bit of popcorn later, you can see that there's about 3 to 4 seconds remaining, which is the same result as before. So the effect is being cancelled and holds up with our previous results. To be extra sure, I also tried it with Taskmaster to see if I would get the exact same outcome. Taskmaster also applies a buff to Weapon Master allies, but because Molecule Man doesn't have that tag, then it doesn't work for him. The important effect here is Taskmaster's uniform bonus, which is pretty much the same as Mystique's passive effect, but instead of providing 45% damage increase, it is 40. Besides that, I'm also using an Insight CTP, which provides an additional 20% damage increase. With all these added effects, I should be able to clear the first two characters much faster than the other tests, but since we established that Molecule Man's leadership nullifies these effects, that shouldn't be the result. After some more popcorn and less butter, you can see that nothing's changed. So now that the results from before are verified, I can move on to the final test and see if the universal type damage bonus that I get from Ebony Maw's uniform effect helps me clear the first two characters faster than the other tests. After I finally finish running this popcorn joke to the ground, you can see that Ebony Maw's passive effect from his uniform is indeed working. I'm able to clear the first two characters in about 30 seconds quicker than the other tests. Unlike faction-based buffs, type buffs work just fine, as well as specific group or affiliation buffs and specific character buffs. This means that unlike the CTP of Insight that gets negated, the CTP of Greed that has effects referring to type damage work just fine. Now that the leadership is fully explained to you, you might be thinking that it doesn't really matter because Molecule Man is pretty expensive to build up anyways and he is not worth this leadership. But like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, he has some additional effects that aren't really explained or showcased in any way. While I was testing Cyrus, also known as Muted Silent in the game, you'll probably most likely recognize his gamer ID from the endless first place world events that he gets. Yeah, that one. He pointed out to me that Molecule Man's debuff leadership works a little bit differently than the other ones in the game, specifically when interacting with the incapacitation effect. So as a quick refresher, the incapacitation effect removes all the active buffs from the opponent. The icon for the incapacitation effect looks like a purple box with a little hand icon in it, and in this case pops up in the top right corner of the buff and debuff icon list. But besides this, not many people know that when the incapacitation effect hits you before any other kind of debuff effect, the debuff cleanse effect won't work. So you can see in this timeline test that I can pretty much almost completely lock down Sentry because I have this incapacitation constantly stacking and reapplying. And that little feather icon that shows the debuff removal isn't activating at all. When Molecule Man is in the lead position though, this doesn't appear to be the case, and he can actually cleanse even incapacitation effects that are active. So on this team, Molecule Man is obviously in the lead position as opposed to the last one where it was Sentry. And after I work my way to the Sentry character, I wait till the debuff cleanse has been activated, and shortly after it's down, I start doing the incapacitation effects. After that, you'll see that after 6 or so seconds pass, the incapacitation is completely cleansed. You can see in the top right corner that the debuff removal is on cooldown, so the little feather icon isn't there. So I switch quickly to Strife to apply the incapacitation effect. You can see that as soon as I apply that debuff effect, the debuff removal skill automatically activates. It's that little yellow feather icon that has a 6-second cooldown in this case. Now you'll see that after that 6-second cooldown ends, the incapacitation will apply normally. Unlike the other debuff leaderships, you'll see that very shortly after, that debuff effect will be removed, or in other words, cleansed. And there you go, just 3 seconds later the debuff completely removes the incapacitation. You can see the same thing in the slowed down clip as well. So besides cancelling damage increase and decrease to factions, and also providing a reduction to chain hit damage, Molecule Man also has the hidden leadership effect of removing incapacitation effects with his debuff cleanse. And if you're able to invest enough in him to get him to T3, then he'll also provide that reduction to reflect for your team. He may be pretty costly for a native T2, but I think a lot of people are kind of undermining how good he is compared to other native T2s. So take for example Strife or Dr. Doom. I'd say that Molecule Man easily is better than these two characters from his collective effects. Not to mention his own base kit too. In these final clips of Alliance Conquest, you can see how deadly incapacitation can be. It can completely lock down very powerful characters and allow you to apply all kinds of other debuff effects while the incapacitation is active. In this case, Doctor Strange can easily time freeze the opponent even though they have the debuff lead from Sentry. However, if you're using Molecule Man in the lead position, this won't happen. It's also important to note that Molecule Man's leadership has a 6-second uptime for the debuff cleanse and a 10-second cooldown time. That's a lot shorter than the other debuff leaderships, which are 12-second uptime and 20-second cooldown time. This is important because if there's characters that can remove that buff, then you can get it up more quickly. You can see in this clip here that the incapacitation doesn't work because Molecule Man immediately cleanses the effect. In the fight right before this, I was able to completely cancel Colossus's effect and Thanos' damage reduction to heroes on his uniform. So I'm going to put a little table here at the end of the video to kind of show what the popular uses for Molecule Man's lead are. This video did take me longer than the other ones to do because of all the testing and kind of analyzing the data and cross-referencing the results. So again, sorry for the delay, but I think it was well worth it because it's going to help out a lot of players. So if you did find this information helpful or useful, then prove it. That like and subscribe button isn't going to press itself. But yeah, that's the end of the video. If you have any comments or questions, make sure to include those below and I'll try my best to answer them. And yeah, the video is now over.